Dr. Larry Walker, welcome to the Mayo Lab podcast.
Thank you so much, David. It's good to see you again.
Always good to see you. And what I like a lot of things about you, but what really fascinates me in this moment the most, that I think will interest so many parents and educators and others, is I consider you really a foremost expert in cannabis, and you have years of research in that is related around natural products, including marijuana. And as we here we are in an era of where we have legality of medical marijuana and just straight up legal, like in the same way, say, alcohol would be in so many states. And so it's just a changing environment. And really, students, I think, are such at a critical juncture because there's so much information, I think, that they don't know. And what I always say is most every drug that comes to the marketplace legally came for good reason and some medical proven benefits, right?
Yes.
And I think marijuana clearly has some, but I think there is also so many facts that young people don't know that get lost in the message of perhaps impact on the brain. So tell us first a little bit about how you came to get involved in marijuana research,
All right. Thank you, David. Yeah, so I went to pharmacy school way back in the ancient era. And when I finished, I really loved pharmacy school. When I finished, I was encouraged by some really great professors that I had to go to graduate school. And I did that and kind of launched a research career, I guess you would say, in pharmacology, which is the study of drugs and how they work. After I finished my graduate work in a short stint doing some postdoctoral things, I came to Ole Miss, and um, just by virtue of the environment at Ole Miss, began to develop interest in natural products. They had a lot of research programs there with an emphasis on natural products. And so at first it was more how to understand these plant-derived drugs and how they work, and can we find new ways they work or new compounds there that and understand how they work. And so at first it was not primarily a cannabis focus, but they had a big marijuana program there. And gradually over the years, I began to get involved with those researchers. Uh, After many years, I became administrator of the National Center for Natural Products Research at Ole Miss, which houses that marijuana program. So at that time, although I wasn't directly involved in the research, I was following closely what others were doing and all of the policy and regulatory and um, public, what would you say, media hype that has exploded about cannabis over the years. So I've been observing all of that and trying to align that against what we know research wise, what we
Yeah.
know about potential benefits, potential harms. And as you said, there's a wealth of information out there. Some of it good, some of it bad. A lot of our young people don't pick up on some of the things probably they should hear about, at
Right.
least in my assessment. And they hear a lot from sources maybe that are not so reliable.
And I think even for parents, it's a bit confusing because in this march to legality, what often when I speak in schools, I had a student tap me not too long ago. They said, "I like that. You're not telling me don't do this." I say, "That's that's your choice, what you do." But I say, like, let's not get confused in a march to legality for young minds. I tell a young people, like, okay, well, alcohol is legal, but if I drank a fifth a day, how functional do you think I would be, right?
Exactly.
And so, like, one thing that's really interesting, Larry, that has struck me, because the University of Mississippi has been a leader in cannabis research. What I understand is that data has been collected over the years in testing of potency of street marijuana, THC, and that there is an arc that shows that it is much stronger today than, say, it was back in 1995.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the slides I do have. If we want to look at that, I can try to share that. But the idea really is that we have, since the early 90s, when we've been tracking it, the potency running from 3 or 4% up now to 20, approaching 20%, and that's average potency. So that means you have a lot of samples that are much, much higher than that.
Wow.
So we've got almost a tenfold increase in the potency of marijuana, not to mention other changes that may be going on as we're breeding the plants and selecting them. Other things are changing as well. It's not just THC.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Sorry, let me add one thing to that, David. Reaching on back, we know that going back in the 70s, for example, that this was before they began to breed um, cannabis to high potency. And probably it was running 2%
Okay.
for wild cannabis. And that was back in the days of the marijuana craze and the,
Hmm.
Cheech and Chong and so
Yeah.
forth. And those were, in those days, that was potent marijuana, but
Yes.
it's nothing compared to what we have now.
You know, parents, I think, I tell a lot of them, this isn't your marijuana. And when I
Mhm.
speak in schools, and for some reason, I don't know if studies bear this out, but anecdotally, Larry, when I speak in schools, let's say I speak to a student body of 1,000 students and I talk about this, I say, hey, folks, what you got to understand is this isn't your grandmother's marijuana. It's not even your mother and father's marijuana. It's going to have a different impact on you because it's so potent. And what I find often after I give that talk is if students are lining up to talk to me, often it's male students. Seems to be more male students, anecdotally, that are impacted by what I would term as who are coming up to me and saying, "Wow, I feel so much better now that you said that because I thought something was wrong with me. I thought marijuana was not addictive. I thought it was mild and it's ruining my life. I can't get off of it. I keep saying I'll quit. I don't. So two questions. Well, really one question. Is there any evidence that young males are maybe a little more predisposed to marijuana addiction?
I think that's right, David. I don't have statistics about that, but certainly that's the impression I get when I'm speaking. And
Mm-hmm.
when I talk with people who are working in the addiction field, I think the problems are much more common with young males. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
the reasons for that. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if there's a genetic, some type of metabolism basis, but it definitely seems to be a bit more prevalent in males.
I'm certainly hearing that in schools. I also was at a school just recently, and I'm talking to a nurse practitioner after I've given a talk. And to just emphasize your point about this stronger THC, the nurse practitioner says, we drug test in our school, and we have for years. And I've been here for years. I think she said some 15 years. And she said, just recently, in the past year or two, something strange happened where our test on when we're testing have a student testing positive for marijuana, the results came back so high suddenly that we contacted the maker of the drug test and we told them their test was broken because we'd never seen
Yeah.
anything like it.
Yeah.
So we're not even at the end of that tail where it's getting stronger every day. And also, Larry, how that marijuana is used, as you mentioned, we'll go back to this phrase. Back in the Cheech and Chong days, it was primarily smoked, I think. And so now, however, there's so many other means where they're extracting more potency even from that stronger marijuana.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of the dealers and experimenters have gotten very creative with ways to concentrate THC. So, for example, in the plant material, you might have getting up to 30% THC which is exceedingly potent plant material. But often they will distill this, extract it, process it so that you may have an oil that's 90+% THC or 95% THC, so that just a toothpick dipped in it, gives you a pretty whopping dose, a pretty hefty dose of THC.
Wow.
And often they're finding ways. Okay, how do we deliver that concentrate by inhalation? How do we vaporize it? Somehow volatilize it so we can inhale it quickly, and by that route you get a very rapid distribution to the brain. And so people who want to abuse it, who want to use it for that reason, can get a quick buzz from that. And very importantly, a naive person who doesn't know what he's doing tries to take it that way, he may have very bad reactions to it because he's not accustomed to that.
Dr. Walker, let me ask you this. If we're here to educate people, and so in the space of mental health, how does using cannabis, marijuana affect different age ranges in their mental health wise? Is there studies that show that affects teens more than adults, or what's the risks of mental health in this space?
Absolutely. Very important point. In the rush that we have to legalization, medical or otherwise, most states have tried to limit exposure to young people, and with good reason, because teenagers, adolescents, maybe even into early 20s, experts are debate about this. When does the brain actually mature? Mm-hmm. But definitely young people are much more susceptible to following addiction and mental health problems after chronic marijuana use. This has actually been well studied, many, many different studies around the world. It's very well known. And it's true for almost any kind of addictive drug, that you start early, you really set a pattern that can be devastating.
Hmm.
So I talked to you. Said a word there, addicted. Mm-hmm. I literally almost fell out of my chair not too long ago when a physician friend of mine, a fantastic doctor, a fantastic enlightened person, told me that marijuana is not addictive. And I think culturally that's part of where we are. And again, it's not about legal or not legal. I tell everybody when I'm in schools, talking to parents, whatever, I say I'm completely for legal or not legal. Whatever the research shows is the healthiest and the best way to go, that's what I'm for. But that still doesn't change the fact alcohol is legal, right? But it doesn't change this fact of that when misused, there can be health benefits. It doesn't change the fact that it can, particularly for some people, be addictive.
Yes, absolutely. And any of your addiction clinics nowadays that are seeing patients, they'll verify this. There may be some differences in the propensity of populations to become addicted, but particularly in young people, that percentage is quite high that they're susceptible to this. And it's it maybe doesn't have the dramatic withdrawal that a full-blown heroin or crack addict might have, but you still have serious withdrawal symptoms. Mm-hmm. You still have this inability on the part of the people who get to that point, inability to shake that without some professional help.
So my son, William, who, it's well known, died of an accidental drug overdose not long after college graduation. When he began using marijuana in high school, middle school and high school, I tried to just talk him out of it, and I tried to punish him out of it, and it didn't really work. And he would just kind of come back to me with the line, "This is what everybody's doing."
Yeah.
But it's interesting that when he passed away, he'd been in treatment for many months and finding some success, and he kept a journal. And in that journal, he wrote about how he had learned that marijuana was addictive. And it was even more, I think, than, what you're talking about. It may, for some, not have the physical withdrawals, but for him, he emotionally wrote about not being able to separate it from him, because for him, it had become a ritual that he began when he woke up.
Mm-hmm.
He continued midday, and he didn't know how to go to sleep without it. So
Yes.
that's, to be honest, that's what I encounter with a lot of young students I talk to in middle schools and high schools and colleges and universities. It kind of becomes this daily part of their life that they feel is harmless, but that harmless thing kind of grows to where over time it kind of takes them over,
Can't escape it. Yes.
So what does what is a high dose of cannabis? I mean, I understand it's probably different for different people. I mean, what are some of the things it does to a mind, particularly a developing brain? I mean, what happens when that THC hits that brain? What are some of the results?
All right. Well, so often this depends on the user, whether they're experienced or not, the route that they're taking it in, the dose that they're taking. So let me talk about those a little bit, separate buckets, if you will. Number one, when an experienced user smokes even a low potency marijuana cigarette, 2%. If they smoke that cigarette like we did back in the days, not me, but
Sure,
my generation did,
Yeah, I get it.
If he smokes that, if he or she smokes that cigarette in that fashion, within 15 to 30 seconds, they'll feel a buzz. Now, this is with low potency, mind you. They'll feel a buzz, and typically they will titrate that buzz, a little bit of a euphoria, a little bit of a chill, a little bit of maybe relaxation in their minds, maybe stress relief in their minds, and they'll titrate that cigarette to keep that buzz for several minutes, and then it will persist for an hour or so. It gradually come back down. With the high potency cigarettes, experienced users will typically take just a little puff, and they may pass it around. So now you're getting maybe 5, 6, 8 times, 10 times more THC in a puff. So they do it much more controlled. But the end point is the same. They try to get a little buzz, sustain it for a while, and then it will gradually come back down. If you took that same amount of THC orally, you won't feel anything for maybe an hour. In fact, you might not feel anything with that amount of THC, but if you took 10 times more, you still might not feel anything for an hour. But after an hour, it begins to hit your system much more gradually, much more subtly, you might say. And the danger is with that route that a young person inexperienced might say, well, I didn't feel anything with that. Let me take 2 more. Well, then an hour or 2 later, now they're really stoned, or they really are beginning to feel the impacts. Typically, chronic marijuana users don't like to take it orally because they don't feel that immediate buzz, that immediate gratification, the immediate high that comes with smoking or inhalation. But even given orally, THC is a really potent drug. And so just a few, let's think about the prescription drug that's on the market, THC, which cancer patients can get from their doctor when they're doing chemo. They might take a 5 milligram capsule 4 times a day. So 20 milligrams a day. That if they go above that, they'll have a lot of side effects, a lot of dizziness, maybe stumbling, maybe a fall risk. So you'll begin to feel side effects. Well, so a lot of times, if you go out and buy a brownie out in the, quote, medical marijuana market, you've got 40, 50 milligrams of THC in there. So you've got a high dose of THC compared to what's there in the medical prescription marketplace. So whenever people talk about, it does this or it doesn't do that, when our medical marijuana folks were coming, legalization folks were trying to visit with us and talk about the need for this, we just asked a simple question: what dose? What route of administration? But they hadn't really thought about that. They just marijuana,
Right.
But it's quite different depending on how you use it, in what form, what dose, what purity, how has it been prepared. So there are many complexities about this.
And that's why in many states so far, the research, it's early, right? It's early in the process, but some of the research I've seen so far suggests that in states where there's some legalization, street marijuana is still predominant. And I think you just spoke to, we can just quickly assume why, is there's a difference probably in potency that's substantial, right? And, I talked to a young man a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I don't like marijuana. I'm tired of it. It's been in my life too long. When I use it now, I've gone up as potent as I can get it. When I use it now, all I'm getting is a little tingly. It's not even doing the same thing that it once did, but I don't know how to stop.
Yeah.
But the potency, it keeps going up, but for some users that have been in it years and years, they're still hitting their wall.
That's exactly right, and it's it varies from one person to another where that wall is, and that probably has to do with the biology that's associated with the response to cannabis. That may vary in some people depending on genetics or other drugs they're taking or other conditions they may have.
So when we talk about medical marijuana, what are there are some proven benefits for some people. It may be like, say, a late stage cancer patient might get some help with nausea. I think that's one, perhaps. I mean, what are some bona fide medical benefits that people might find in medical marijuana?
Well, so on the prescription drug front, what has been approved so far are for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, for wasting syndrome in patients with AIDS. So it stimulates your appetite, and so that's a legitimate approved medical use. In other countries around the world, there are cannabis THC products approved for multiple sclerosis to help relieve spasticity and pain with multiple sclerosis. And there are a number of other potentially legitimate medical uses, but in most of the other cases, we don't have this worked out about what doses does it take, how often, how does it work with other drugs the patient might be on. In the medical marijuana world, you have a completely different ballgame, because typically states will approve maybe 50 or more different uses, or maybe use for anything you want to use it for. And I firmly believe that one day we'll have legitimate ways to use cannabis-derived drugs for some of those conditions, not all of them. In the herbal medicine world, a lot of people, they'll have their favorite herbal product, and it's good for everything. It's good. It cures this and it helps that. Well, drugs don't work like that. They're not good for everything, and marijuana is not good for everything. But there are probably some legitimate uses. We just need to understand what are we doing in medical marijuana programs Do we have good medical or health professional oversight? Do we know what we're dosing? Do we know what we're giving the patients? Are we monitoring the outcomes? Are we monitoring if this is improving, or if there are side effects or abuse problems or addiction problems? Are we monitoring those? Well, in most cases, the answer is no. It's just, it's a business, and medical marijuana programs are set up for cannabis companies to make money. And so a lot of times the medical oversight is fairly limited. It's there, but it's fairly limited, and the range of products is very wide and very variable. And so some states have better programs than others. And I will say that in the Mississippi program, one strength that they do have is that they do require really rigorous testing, so that you have to label what's there, and you have to have an independent verification that that's what's there. So that is a plus, but there's still very little guidance about dosing and management of patients with this condition or that condition. Very little. One of the things we're trying to do is see if we can set up a program to voluntarily have patients allow outcomes to be monitored, so we can understand, did you get improvement with what
Wow.
preparation, with what dose? Did you have some side effect, some problem? What was it that caused that? And if we can match that to the label and know, what they were taking, maybe we can begin to sort out some of these benefits and risks. But for most programs, medical marijuana programs, it's really hard to do that. And for ours, it's hard to do it, but we're hoping to get some info on it.
Wow. Dr. Walker, I know there's a study in the slides that you sent about marijuana dependence and the disorders that come with that. Can you talk about specific disorders and what that looks like versus the general population?
Yeah, so a number of studies have shown now that, especially with teens who are chronic marijuana users, that the incidence of all kinds of mental health and mood disorders are exaggerated, 2-3-fold, maybe sometimes more. These may range from depression, addiction problems, aggression, other types of mood disorders. There's even good evidence now that marijuana use is associated with schizophrenia. The frequency of schizophrenia is much higher with chronic use. This has been debated a lot, whether that's causal or whether it goes along somehow with the propensity to use marijuana. But some recent studies are suggesting that it may actually, with early chronic users, it may actually exaggerate problems with schizophrenia down the road. I'm not a mental health expert in any fashion, but these studies have come from well-run, well-designed studies from the different institutes with the federal government and other countries around the world. One interesting study in New Zealand has been going on for 50 years, I guess, where they are just monitoring multiple lifestyle issues, including marijuana and alcohol use, but monitoring it from childhood in a huge number of adults now, but when they started, they were children or adolescents, and just monitoring how did they progress in their social life, in their education, in their economic progress, in their mental health. How did they progress if they were heavy marijuana users versus not? And it's really quite striking that the heavy users, especially if they started young, they make less money, they have more family problems, they have more addiction problems, they have more societal adjustment problems, so all kinds of things that are difficult to quantify if you don't have a study you wouldn't pick it up in one or two people that you might know, but if you quantify this, measure this over a period of time in large numbers of people, you can see these things, even IQ tests the ones that were users performed worse on IQ tests. And so this is very intriguing studies and alarming studies, I think, that particularly point us toward caution with young people.
Right. Exactly. And that, what you just talked about, and he's not going to mind me sharing this, but I have the anecdotal study of that New Zealand one. My son Hudson, who's now more than a decade sober, he allows me to share his story, and he began using marijuana regularly late in middle school and continued through high school on a habitual basis. And it's interesting that when he decided to stop in college, two things happened. One, we began to get to know him in a way we never knew him before. And we used to joke that he matured in dog years before our eyes, because maybe there's some, that maturation process is put on hold in emotional and development in some ways. And then particularly around money, he wasn't good with money before. Now he's great with it. And almost overnight, he became great with it. He was hungrier to make it. He held on to it, managed it better. And so I've seen that anecdotal study, and I've actually heard him counsel other young people about that because he experienced it. And also, I've seen it real time, but also, Larry, it's interesting when you talk about there are some medical benefits, but there's just a lot of misinformation. For example, one is, and I encounter this with a lot of parents, and they'll say to me, I don't like it that my teen is habitually using marijuana, but they suffer from anxiety, and I know it's good for anxiety, so I just kind of look the other way instead of going to get them treatment. However, I've seen studies that show that for some people, depending on personality type and depending on the strain of cannabis they're using, that for probably 50% of the people, it not only doesn't reduce their anxiety, it may exacerbate it greatly. A, have you heard that? And B, if that's true, what do we do to get that word to parents?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I don't know what the numbers are, but there are a lot of people that have, when they were first exposed to cannabis, they may have actually an anxiety reaction that is their reaction is negative. They say, I don't like it. A lot of people, you may have heard people like this, I don't like marijuana, because they had that kind of anxiogenic reaction when they first smoked it. And it could have been dose, it could have been their genetics, there may be other factors, but it's definitely true. And actually the data on THC for treating anxiety is not very good. It's better for some other things than it is for treating anxiety. However, there are many who swear by it. That's their go-to Valium, I guess you might say.
Mm-hmm. If you had a room full of parents you were speaking to, in essence, we do on the Mayo Lab podcast, and some parent raises their hand and go, I don't really know what to do, but for a teenager, would you recommend, knowing what you know, Larry, if I'm a parent and I'm asking you for advice, is it okay for my teen to use marijuana or not? Not that I have full control, but I might get them into counseling more quickly, or maybe even treatment if I really understood. Is marijuana for a young person something you would recommend or no?
Absolutely not. In fact, I really think we need to sound this alarm more broadly in schools. I know you can't always stop what teenagers are going to do, but they don't need the message coming from adults that, oh, this is going to be okay. I don't know if I shared this story with you before, but in Colorado, when they first legalized medical marijuana, it was on a doctor to patient basis. In other words, the doctor would say, I want you to use this strength or whatever and go to this clinic and you can get it. So it was just a doctor patient thing, and they left alone the public marketing, you might say. And it did pretty well. It was actually a well-received program, I think, without a lot of negative impact, at least that was easily observed. But then they went to opening the dispensary, so you could go and buy what you wanted to on every corner. Well, then the problems in the schools begin to rise, and the ER admissions begin to rise with young people, because the perception is, well, it's legal, it's there on the corner, I can buy it easier than I can buy alcohol. It must be okay. What's the harm? My point is, that was long-winded, but my point is that perception drives usage up in young people. The perception that it's safe, it can't be that bad, it's been approved for medical purposes, I got a card, it makes them feel like that there are no consequences to it. In our public campaigns, we don't need to lie, we don't need to over dramatize about the dangers, but we need to educate parents, teachers, our organizations that are promoting health and wellness. We need to advertise it. I think that I'm not recommending it for anyone, but especially for young people.
Right.
There are dangers that we may be. Actually, I don't want to overhype this, but in some animal studies, you treat young animals with cannabis, with THC, you permanently change their brain. I mean, permanently. It will not recover. Now, a lot of times those are high doses, and we don't know exactly how to translate this into humans. But I think there's enough signal there. We know enough that drugs of abuse in young people change the way your brain develops.
Yes.
And this is just too risky for us to play with for some modest potential medical benefit in young people, or for all my friends are doing it.
That's great stuff. Dr. Larry Walker, thank you for joining us on the Mayo Lab podcast. Such important information about a topic that I think most every family of young people will face, either with their children or their friends at one time or another. Just wonderful information, and I appreciate you joining us so much.
Thank you, David, and thank y'all for all your work. Very, very commendable and much needed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mayo Lab podcast. The Mayo Lab podcast is produced by Dr. Natasha Jeter, Dr. Megan Rosenthal, David McGee, Alexis Lee, and Slade Lewis. This podcast was recorded at Broadcast Studio in Oxford, Mississippi. The show was mixed and mastered by Clay Jones, and our original music was composed by Slade Lewis. The Mayo Lab podcast is brought to you by the William McGee Institute for Student Wellbeing. For more information on the Mayo Lab, head over to themayolab.com and follow us on social media at the Mayo Lab. If you enjoyed listening to the Mayo Lab podcast with David McGee, we need your help. Tell others about it. And we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of David McGee and guests of the show. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for the medical advice of a licensed counselor or physician. The listener should consult with their mental health professional in any matters relating to his or her health or the health of a child.